Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this next episode of In the Nick of Time. Today, we're lucky we get another great guest, Dan Wilson, joining us from Control Plane to talk to us about cloud agnosticism. I thought that wasn't a word, but it is a word. So this is great. How to be agnostic, how to run across multiple providers and not get locked in. But what are the trade-offs, right? Are you going to be able to use the best features of these cloud providers if you end up abstracting your entire stack? That's going to be part of the discussion for today. So I hope this is going to be an exciting time for everybody. I know it's so important for me to make sure that the government specifically does not get locked into a single provider. But more importantly, I think to get access to best of breed, you want to have that diversity of options. You want to be able to have that redundancy, that security baked in as well. And effectively being able to run anywhere gives you a lot of flexibility too. So that's all great things to think about. If you have not subscribed to the show, please do that. Make sure you go to inthenickoftime.tv so we can send you an email every time we do have the next episode coming up every week. So that's going to be an email per week. Per week, we're not abusing of your kindness of sharing your emails. And then, of course, if you've not checked it out yet, many of you did, but check out learnwithnick.com. We still have now up to 3,000 actually early adopters for Let's Beat China for the 20% off since we passed the 2,000. And then the military is 50% off, military, civilians, and veterans as well with the military coupon code. So check that out. A new video every week, and we're going to be launching our metaverse in the next few weeks. So that's going to be great as well. If you've missed the last video that we published, do check it out. It's interesting. It is about the TDD, test-driven development, and how to write tests before you write any code, and the benefits of that. So check out that video. And if you missed the video before that, we released the top 20 books for 2022 to read, and many great books on there. But if you really want to understand why we are already at war with China, you want to read the book from General Spalding, War Without Rules, that came out this year, that really explained very well the Chinese and more importantly, the CCP vision behind their different act of war going after effectively our supply chain, companies, IP, and of course, many of the key technologies that we're trying to build in the Department of Defense as well. So now, without further ado, we're going to bring up in a second Dan Wilson. But first, I wanted to give you a rundown of his background. He's the CTO and co-founder of Control Plane, and he started back in October 2019. He has over 20 years of experience working on cloud services in contributor and leadership roles. And he's touched a little bit of everything from operations to engineering to architecture. He worked at SAP Concur, where he scaled their SaaS offering to millions of users and directed their big push to the cloud. He has obviously a passion for building tools to help engineering teams leverage cloud native solutions and do that with ease and sustain flexibility and power. He's a open source software advocate with contributions to not only Kubernetes, Istio, and Knative, all my three top favorite open source projects. So he's checking all the boxes so far, right? And of course, he's been inspiring teams to focus on powerful but simple architecture, end-to-end security, and failure mitigation. And so that's going to be part of the discussion today. What does that mean to create an abstraction layer to be cloud agnostic? Does that actually create simplicity, or does it make it harder for you to do your job? What are the benefits? What are the impediments? What are the issues to pay attention to? With that, let's welcome Dan on the show. Hey,
Hey,
Dan, good to have
thanks,
you.
Nick. Really happy to be here. Excited to be talking with you as well. So thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, I
Looking
was so
forward to our
excited.
discussion.
Well, okay, and it's a discussion that's always interesting because I've been a big proponent of being agnostic and not getting locked into a single provider, particularly in the world of fast IT pace. And people kind of push back on me, saying, "Oh, you're going to trade off different things when it comes to getting agnostic. Are you really using best of breed? Are you complexifying your stack? And so it's going to be part of the discussion today. But before we get started, I always want my guests to give us a little bit of their background and then journey. So we'll let you do that.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it really started 20 years ago at SAP Concur, and I had the opportunity to work for some very visionary leaders with Mike Hilton, Raj and Steve Singh. And this was the early days of SaaS. It wasn't called cloud then, where we're trying to get expense management up and running for other businesses, but it was hosted by Concur. And I had the opportunity to work and see that company grow throughout that 20 years, and we had to solve a lot of challenges to grow that stack. Throughout that time, I was able to work in operations. I was able to work in a lot of different parts of ops, in database management and networking, storage, in architecture for operations. And I spent the last 5 years or so on the engineering side, doing principal architecture work in the office of the CTO. It was throughout that time that we were trying to really break apart our monolith and move to a microservices architecture to solve some of our scaling challenges, and also move to the cloud. And we saw Kubernetes as a way to really accelerate it on that vision because of the capabilities that it provided and the way that we could write to the Kubernetes API once and use that inside of our data center, and then also be able to use that in the cloud. And it worked out pretty well. It had some challenges. These were the early days of Kubernetes. It was like, Kubernetes 1.1 back in 2016, when we first started to go down this path. And this is also around the time that I got to meet Duran, who's our CEO now. And we solved some big problems together at Concur, and then he left and went to VMware to solve some challenges for VMware. And he's the type of guy that I just knew if I ever had the opportunity to work with him again, I would jump on it. Very smart, especially when it comes to engineering and authorization, but just fun to work with. So when I had the chance in 2019 to work with him again, he asked me to be a part of this new company he was starting. I jumped on it. It only took a minute to think about it. And we've been trying to solve a lot of the challenges that we had to solve at SAP Concur, but more in a general way for anyone to be able to take advantage of this. And what we built, I think a good way to describe it is, at SAP Concur, I was working for Cameron Adizade, and he had this vision of being able to have an idea in the morning and have it up and running in production in the afternoon for an engineering team, and to still check all the boxes that are required for the teams, the security, monitoring, resiliency that you need in order to really run a production grade service, but not have to spend months getting there for engineering teams. We need to move rapidly and quickly. And that's sort of the base level of what we solved when we went out to build Control Plane. But we also wanted to add in this cloud agnostic aspect of our product so that companies could be decoupled from cloud providers. So that's how I got my start and why I think I'm here talking with you. So thank you.
No, absolutely. And you guys have done a lot of great work in a very short amount of time. Of course, Doron is amazing. You're right, and he's not only a great engineer, but he's also someone that's very humble as opposed to me. So that's great. I love him. So we'll dig into the subject, right? Because, like you said, obviously solving this for SAP Concur obviously is a different beast than bringing a solution for dozens, if not thousands, of enterprises and smaller businesses. And first, I think we need to define what does cloud agnostic actually mean, right? Because a lot of people have different opinion on that. So maybe tell us first what you think that means.
Sure. Yeah. And everybody gets a different picture in their head when you say any of these cloud terms. Like, for example, if you say cloud native, I don't know about you, but I get a picture in my head of the CNCF landscape and the thousand or so uh, different companies that are on that list and different segments of the landscape and how complicated that is. And if you think of multi-cloud, like for me, like that has the vision of how challenging it is to get up and running on a single cloud provider with
Right.
the hundreds of different services that you can use on a single cloud provider, and how do you bridge the gap between that and then bringing in yet another cloud, right? So multi-cloud has this kind of complexity vision to it, and with Kubernetes, like I said, the idea was at first, when we were trying to leverage Kubernetes, it was being decoupled from the cloud, really. Being able to write to that single Kubernetes API and run it anywhere. And over time, what I've seen happen with Kubernetes and the CNCF, and maybe you have a different perspective, so it'd be great to hear your perspective, but I've seen the hyperscalers adding their own vision and unique capabilities on top of Kubernetes in a way that is really taken away from that initial vision. So now, if you're running Kubernetes today and you're on GKE and Google, it's a very different experience than if you're on EKS in Amazon or AKS in Azure, because there's unique capabilities that they each have for those cloud providers. There's 100 different settings between those different Kubernetes offerings. And even something as simple as the base level functionality of DNS on GKE, they're using kubedns. And on Amazon and Azure, they're using core DNS, which is a slightly different product. You configure them different ways. And then even the core DNS offering between Amazon and Azure is different. On Azure, it's fully managed, and there's different configuration maps that you can add custom settings on top of the managed offering. But on Amazon, you're kind of on the hook to run it all yourself. So you own the full suite of settings for core DNS. My point is that initial vision of what Kubernetes was supposed to be isn't fulfilled in the marketplace today. And that initial vision is what I think it is to be cloud agnostic, where you're fully decoupled from the cloud providers and you can run your workloads anywhere using a common API and being fully abstracted from differences between each of the cloud providers.
And so you said it right. I think it's there's a notion of complexity. I guess most people wonder why do I want to be running on multiple clouds, right? And so there are different aspects and benefits of doing that, right? Of course, you have the ability to be more resilient. you have the diversity of options. You can then create kind of a cohesive control plane, right, across multiple cloud providers and not just one. Have a single implementation of zero trust across providers. Make it all these services available to your development teams, and use best of breed based on what you want to do. So, what do you think is the best or the biggest motivators for teams to even consider being agnostic?
Yeah, definitely. It can be different to different people in an organization. Um, but I think that there's three main reasons that this is important to be cloud agnostic. One is from an innovation perspective, that you don't want to be limited to the menu of services that are available from a single cloud provider. Because next week, there could be some new compute type or service that becomes available that could really be advantageous for you as a business to take advantage of. And if it's not on the cloud provider that you chose, then you have a tremendous amount of work suddenly to start architecting your platform for a different cloud if you didn't like plan for this ahead of time. So that's why I think it's important from an innovation perspective. I also think it's important from a resiliency perspective, and I've heard arguments back and forth about this, but the reality is that a failure of a service or a component at a cloud provider isn't always the same, and it's not always all or nothing. Like it's not like every a few months US East 1 for AWS goes down completely. It does have issues, and if there's going to be an issue at Amazon, it's most likely going to be at US East 1. But my point is, sometimes a failure is less significant than a whole region, but it still impacts your workload in that region. And we saw this with one of our customers who's having an issue with a hyperscaler in one location, and then they were able to click a button and move to a different region on a different cloud provider and solve their issue in minutes, as opposed to having to open a ticket and wait for someone who really knew what was going on to dig in and figure it out and resolve the issue. So I think it does help from a resiliency perspective, even if there's naysayers out there that say, well, these things only happen rarely, and it's not worth the effort. So I think the last reason, which is important to a lot of folks, is from a price negotiation perspective. If you're all in on Amazon and then you're trying to negotiate a long-term contract with them, and you tell them, yeah, well, if you don't give me another 5% off, then I'm going to walk and go to a different cloud provider. I think that they just kind of laugh, right? Because they know.
Call your bluff. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They know that it's a position of weakness. But if you
Unless if you're me, they knew I wasn't kidding around. But yeah, you're right.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. But if you could, show them, hey, okay, well, next week, watch how much I'm consuming. I'm going to flip things over to use someone else. Then they know you're not bluffing anymore. So maybe that's
Put it to practice.
extreme.
Yeah. Put it to practice.
But there could be arbitrage opportunities there, so to speak, where you could take advantage of lower prices from other providers easily, and negotiate better contracts.
And do you see also people wanting to? And we're going to do a deep dive on the cyber aspect of this, but as a piece of the puzzle, right? Having potentially the same enforcement stack and the same cyber stack across provider, is that something that also brings better visibility and better understanding of what's going on?
Yeah, I think absolutely. That would give you a lot better visibility into things, and yeah, we should definitely deep dive on the cyber stuff later.
Yeah, we have a
I
whole
think that
we have a
there's
whole segment on
probably
cyber. So
Yeah, maybe it'd be good to hear your perspective on this. Would it help from a cybersecurity perspective to be running on multiple cloud providers, just because then the threat of someone attacking a single cloud provider, or knowing where their request is landing when they're making a call, even knowing if it's Google or Amazon or Azure, makes things easier for an attacker versus harder if it could go anywhere.
I mean, it's a great question, right? Because you look at kind of what we've done in DoD, by creating a government cloud version in the U.S. government in general, with Amazon and Azure and everybody else. You end up in a situation where you have less regions, right? Very well known regions. So it would be pretty simple for China to bomb it, and then we are left without a cloud, right? So it's a
Got
pretty
it.
scary kind of concept, right? So you're reducing options and have less regions to consume from. So
Yeah, that is
it's
scary.
definitely something important. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So we talk about why does this matter, but I guess the biggest impediment, right, that people complain about is, well, okay, you're gonna do all this stuff, but you're not gonna benefit from the best feature of each cloud if you're gonna just stick to the common stuff across providers. In DoD we end up using Kubernetes to orchestrate everything, so we have the same kind of orchestration, enforcement, but also visibility, centralized logging, telemetry, policy enforcement point, right? Emission controller stuff. So we had a lot of like great enforcement capabilities, right, to be able to run, by the way, not just on cloud provider, but also on jets, bombers, and space systems and nuclear systems even. It's always a little scary for people from the commercial side to find out we're running Kubernetes on all these kind of weapons effectively.
Yeah.
But it's also a massive enabler, right? I mean, you described kind of the benefit of it. When I pushed it back, in 2018, people thought I was a little crazy, and maybe I'm a little crazy, anyways. But I guess you also mentioned that the benefit of using something like control plane will be, well, you can also end up having access to all the cloud providers' resources and decide to consume them. But then if you do, then you start also losing the benefit of saying, hey, well, I can move off of it because now I'm locked into that one provider. So how do you balance that, right? Because if the benefit is going to be, well, look, I can go negotiate pricing, I can do, I can be agnostic, I can run everywhere, I'm more resilient, but then I start consuming, services that are just on one provider, well, then you kind of defeat the point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a common counter argument to being multi-cloud, is that then you have this least common denominator effect, right? Where you're only using workloads from or services that are available in all the clouds, as opposed to having that capability to leverage all of the capabilities from all of the cloud providers. And that's how we've kind of flipped this on its head, right? Because no one else has ever made it easy to access every service from every cloud provider before. It's not really in the best interest of Amazon to build something like that, or Google or Azure, right? They even if you're using their Kubernetes offering that you can run in your data center or on someone else's cloud, well, all the API calls are still tying back to
Right.
Amazon or to Google or
Yeah, the
to
control plane,
Azure,
and yeah.
right? Because they want you to use their APIs. Their vision of cloud native, by the way, is using their API native, as opposed to
All right.
uh, being really cloud agnostic. But this does play into an architecture decision then, as opposed to being restricted from using APIs in another cloud provider, which is the place where a lot of people are today, right? They only have that menu of services from one cloud provider to build off of. So then it becomes an architectural choice. Do I want to leverage Cosmos on Azure or Active Directory or Spanner, knowing that those are very unique services in a cloud provider? Or do I want to, design things in a way where I have a primary that's available to my application, and a secondary and another cloud provider that's semi-equivalent. But at least then you have that architectural choice, which, doing that today is extremely hard, right? You would have to, let's say you wanted to build and communicate to multiple clouds from your workload today. You'd have to have some gnarly Terraform script that's building things out in all of the cloud locations and wiring up credentials. And then you'd also have the gobbledygook of code that's making decisions around which one you're using, picking up those credentials, communicating. We'll talk about it more on later with identity, but it would be really challenging for most companies to do this today. And the way that we built our platform is to make this easier. So.
Right. And so when you look at the best features, obviously, the beauty there is you giving up options to people, right? Because effectively, as long as for me as it's a conscious decision from the architecture team to say, hey, we're going to use this feature here, and we know there's going to be some vendor lock-in, but we're going to benefit from it as an organization. That's a conscious decision. People understand the pros and cons. The issue I've seen is often, particularly in the government, but even outside of the government, I've seen teams completely getting locked in without even thinking about it or even paying attention or understanding it, and then they realize it when it's too late. I remember the big push, from when I started, there was a massive look into Pivotal Cloud Foundry, and I started pushing Kubernetes. I got all the heat in the world, and I end up, I guess, betting on the right horse, right? With we've seen what happened to PCF.
Yeah.
But now you then you had people pushing. Well, then we're going to move to Tanzu, right, with VMware, and they started pushing the community edition and say, well, if we get locked in, we can go back to the community edition of VMware, and we're going to be fine because it's open source and we can just use it for free. And now just VMware announced this, a few days ago, whatever, that the community edition is not going to be open source and supported anymore. So now you're like, so see how people always justify things and decisions, but they don't think about, okay, what happens if, right, this is not the same status quo, and now you have a different decision to make. I remember also another team in the Air Force was completely locked into PCF and said, oh, if they told me if they needed to move off of PCF to go to Kubernetes, it would only take 2 weeks. And I said, oh, okay, 2 weeks, that's great. And then when finally VMware bought Pivotal, and they kind of told us that, hey, we're going to focus on Kubernetes now, and so we told them, hey, well, we told you it was going to happen, so now you're going to move to Kubernetes, right? And they said, yeah, we're going to do that. I said, well, 2 weeks, right? You told me 2 weeks, right, a year ago. And they're like, well, we kind of looked at it again. It's really going to take 2 years, right? And I'm like,
Oh, man.
oh, it's 2 weeks, 2 years. What's it's the same, right? I mean, no big deal, right? And that cost hundreds of millions to the taxpayer, and I was pretty upset about it. And I took a lot of heat about that too. But that shows you, right, that people sometimes, I don't think it's malicious. I would say in this case it was more incompetence, and that's also the issue when you have only one vendor, right, giving you advice and you're getting your training. They were getting all the Pivotal Labs training, and all they would drink is the Pivotal Kool-Aid. And then when it was time to look elsewhere, it was like, oh, wait a minute. The all the training we got and all the numbers we got and all the information we got came from this one biased company because they want you to use their services, which is normal, right? I don't blame the company. I blame the government making the mistake, right? But that's kind of a good reminder of, hey, we need to pay attention to what's going on, and no one knows what's going to stick and not stick. So having diversity of option, just like diversity of talent from multiple companies and backgrounds, is so important, right?
I agree. It's tough to pick the right horse in the race, especially when you can't see the future, right? We share that decision, by the way. Back in the SAP days of Concur, when we were choosing Kubernetes or deciding on Kubernetes, Cloud Foundry was one of the options, and we were getting some pressure internally to choose Cloud Foundry because SAP was so big into Cloud Foundry. They had already invested
Right.
so much in it. And I
Good morning
remember,
after bad money.
Yeah, I remember the discussion. So you were you following the service catalog project then on
Hmm.
Kubernetes? Well, because you
Yep,
could
yep.
take these Cloud Foundry packages essentially and run them on
Run it.
Kubernetes. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember that. And it's funny, right? The Air Force was the largest customer of Pivotal, right? We had 100 million a year. Spent a sixth of their revenue pretty much was coming from the Air Force, which I always found to be, unacceptable, right? You don't want to be in a situation as a government where you're representing such a massive amount of the revenue of a company. I don't think it's healthy. You know what I mean? I think that demonstrates there is already a problem with the kind of the diversity of the company's customer, right? But anyway, so let's look a little bit about now you have this concept, right, of what we call a global virtual cloud, right? So effectively kind of interconnecting, right, all these cloud service providers into one cohesive stack. How does this work, and what are I mean, it's what are the benefits, I guess?
Yeah, so let's imagine for a second that we wanted to build the Nick cloud, and we were going to pick some different regions from different cloud providers and stick them together in this virtual cloud. So if we took US West 2 from Amazon, Azure East 2, and GCP Central, so we had the US sort of covered, and we created this global virtual cloud then from all three of those regions. If you ran a workload on the Nick cloud, it would run in all three of those locations at the same time. And each one of those locations would have a unique endpoint for that workload, but that's not really the interesting part. The interesting part is that you then get a global endpoint for that global virtual cloud, which is geo-routed.
Right.
So your end users get routed to the closest, lowest latency available edge location in that global virtual cloud. So that then if there's an issue with performance because a location is slowing down or availability, then the request will get routed to a different location. And this really gives that resiliency for your endpoints you need um, in a much simpler way than having to tie all of this together yourself. And that's the concept of a global virtual cloud.
Yeah, that's very so. Obviously, it comes with multiple um, key capabilities that you have to bring together to make this happen, right? It's not just fancy networking. You talk about abstracting, different things like identity management and key management and other things. So we're gonna dig into each of those because I think it's a pretty big lift, right? But so effectively, I guess the vision is like, okay, we're gonna run on multiple clouds and route traffic across multiple CSPs. What is the limit, right? What if one of my use case in the department back in the day, a year ago, was to bring a cloud stack that would have not only the multiple cloud providers regions, but also I wanted to have some hot available locations that were not cloud providers, but more like duty data centers that would be running Azure Stack or Amazon Outpost or whatever, right? And so, what's the limitation there with what you're thinking about? Could you do something like that?
Absolutely, yeah. We have had this a part of our architecture from day one. We knew that we couldn't limit it to the available locations of cloud providers. At SAP, we had some public sector environments that we had to get into as well. So we knew government had to be in scope and that we had to plan for that. Also, some folks have a need to run inside their own data centers. So we needed to include that in our architecture, and we have. So we can take any Kubernetes uh, deployment and tie it into control plane just as if it's another cloud location. So that when you're building that Nick cloud, you could pick and choose from your own private data centers and build your cloud across those as well. And then, yes, yeah, the vision is from there, you can connect up to the cloud service providers and access any service from any cloud provider, no matter where you're running. If you're running inside your own data center, you're running in one cloud provider, because maybe your vision is still to use one cloud provider, and you just want to be multi-region.
Right.
Well, then you can still leverage the capabilities from the other cloud providers, even though your workload's running in one.
So can you also run outside of a CSP, like on a vSphere virtualized environment? Is that another option you could do, or you need those fancy cloud APIs, right?
No, you don't need the fancy cloud APIs at all. All we need is Kubernetes and the ability to have a load balancer endpoint in Kubernetes. That's it.
Right.
Um,
So you can run. You don't even need fancy load balancer hardware. It could be completely virtualized, right?
yeah. You can use Metal Load Balancer, and just have the right routing configured to route like your BGP networking
Right.
configured.
Yeah, pretty cool. So I guess let's look at another piece that people often complain about, right? No, you're gonna cost them a fortune, right? You're gonna run all this stuff. You're gonna create a bunch of like management and control plane things running. Particularly if you run Cloud Foundry, you're gonna have a bunch of VMs running to run that stuff. Although like I said, we're moving to Kubernetes. That's just a joke, but effectively, if you run obviously all this stuff, obviously there's a cost piece, but also there's a complexity piece, right? People say, well, now you're expanding my attack surface. You're gonna have all this stuff, right? My take was, well, we're gonna write on Kubernetes. It's gonna be the same containers. It's gonna be abstracted. It's gonna be exactly the same stack. So there's gonna be no drift, right? So we're gonna have the same enforcement, the same visibility, the same centralized logging and telemetry, SIEM, so policy enforcement point, right? So we had all that. What's your take first on the cost aspect, I guess?
If you took the extreme side of this, right, and you said, okay, now I'm going to take my stack that was just running in AWS GovCloud, and I want to run it in every region of every cloud provider out there known to man, well, then obviously your costs are going to go up, right? But we've counteracted this in a few very important ways. One is when you're using control plane and you're using our hardware as instead of your own hardware, then you're only going to pay for the compute that you're actually using. And we
And
have
you like those some of this cloud provider effectively. I think Amazon was doing this at some point or whatever. They were not charging for the control plane of Kubernetes. They were just charging for the nodes and the workload running. So that's kind of the same concept, right? You're not charging that control plane, but that's if you host it as a SaaS, obviously, and you
right.
provide it as a service. If people
Yep.
wants to host their stuff, they're gonna have to pay for that. But
Yep, but also, we've put the insights into managing Kubernetes in a very efficient way into
right.
our stack. So even when you're using the self-hosted version of our product, then we're going to run Kubernetes more efficiently than you're able to run it yourself in most cases. I think the high majority of folks out there are overpaying for Kubernetes today, especially if they're using GKE, EKS, AKS. The auto scaling settings are highly tuned to spin up new nodes instead of to run extremely efficiently, getting the reservations of workloads right so that they can take advantage of the hardware when they need to, but not conflict with other workloads running on the cluster is
Mm-hmm.
extremely hard. We've learned a lot in running a high number of clusters for a lot of companies. We put that smarts into our platform. So what we've seen so far is companies are able to increase the resiliency running in multiple geographies or across multiple cloud providers for the same or less than what they're paying to run in a single location today,
Mm.
which is incredible. I mean, if you think about it, like to be able to have the capability of running anywhere and the same cost or less cost, it's amazing.
Yeah, no doubt. Um, I guess when you look at uh, the the stack you had to build, right? Some people have different workload. Obviously, we had a need to have Kubernetes nodes, labeled for traditional CPUs, GPUs, and even TPUs potentially, with Google stuff. How do you deal with that? Do you have to worry about that kind of stuff?
We do. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, same type of labeling, and I'm sure it gets quite complex
Yeah.
with the Kubernetes language, and as a part of the YAML, in order to get things to go to the right place, and then also prevent things from going to the wrong place.
Right.
It's not as simple as you think it would be, in order to make sure everything lands in the right place in your cluster. So yeah, a lot of those
Another
smarts had to be built in.
Yeah, and so another question we were getting right on social media was, well, that's great, right? We're abstracted, we're not getting locked into the cloud provider. Sounds like it's pretty fun, not costing too much money. But hey, aren't we getting locked in to you, right? As the abstraction layers become the lock-in point. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, yeah, and absolutely you are to a certain degree, right? I mean, you're always going to be locked into something.
Right.
Um, what we did when we built our API is we want it to be extremely efficient but simple to use.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're using Kubernetes today, right, um, you have to understand what deployments are and what services are and network policy and Istio objects like virtual services, and now there's the gateway API on Kubernetes. There's there's about 100 different CRDs that you need to understand what they are and how to use them, depending on what you're trying to do with Kubernetes. And what we've done with our API is we've taken the things that are most commonly configured by engineering teams and operations and whoever else. And we put it in a simple, easy object that we call the workload. So uh, yeah, you're somewhat getting locked into our API, but it's a much simpler API to use. It's easy to reason about. We have a converter as well, so you can take the Kubernetes YAML that you're using today, run it through our converter, and then get the simpler, easier to use control plane
And you do it the
language.
other way around too?
I don't have a converter to do it the other way around, just because, like I said, there's 100 different custom
Yeah.
resource definitions, and the one that people are using may be different than
Right.
than
Right.
what someone
So you
else is
can't
using.
go back. Yeah.
Yeah, if you use an Istio versus Linkerd, well, yeah,
Right.
different objects right now. Once the Gateway API comes out, then that's easier, right? And
Right.
people are using Gateway, but yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. So yeah, I guess this kind of answers the question. So obviously, when you start implementing all this stuff, there's a lot of nightmares you have to face, right? And the first thing obviously comes with managing identities, both the cloud identities, your workload identities, your privileged access on the cloud provider, but also on the Kubernetes stack, right? So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so going back to that scenario that I was talking about earlier, let's say you had a workload that wanted to use S3 on Amazon. It wanted to use, let's say, Cosmos on Azure, and then Spanner
Mm-hmm.
on Google. You'd have to have Terraform that granted different identities for each of those cloud providers access that the workload was going to use, and it would then create secrets basically that it uses to authenticate to those cloud providers. And then at runtime, you'd have to somehow get those credentials down to those workloads through your CI/CD pipeline. You probably are going to be storing them in secrets on the cluster, and then um, mounting those secrets to an environment variable or to a volume that the workload's using at runtime. And then you think about the attack vectors that are available and the threat model for that, and it goes all the way back to your Terraform, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of places where someone could get at that secret. What we did to simplify this is we came out with a concept of universal cloud identity. And what this allows you to do is instead of creating these credentials that you're passing down to the workload, you define what the workload has access to in any of the clouds or any third-party service in one place.
Mm-hmm.
And that identity then is granted to the workload so that at runtime, when the workload wants to access those resources, it gets temporary credentials to access with least base privileges, exactly what you've defined in that identity, to the cloud provider. So there's no more secrets to rotate. There's nothing in your CI that has any access that the uh, a bad actor could use to get into your system. It's only at runtime that it's getting that temporary credential, and it's using. So as a developer, you don't need to know where to get the secret from and how to communicate with the cloud API. You just use the cloud native library. So if you're connecting to Amazon, use Amazon's library to communicate, and it just gets it in the Amazon way at runtime. Or if you're using Google, same thing, or Azure, same thing. And we've done this, we've expanded this beyond the scope of just the three major cloud providers. We've also provided this capability for network access to resources in private cloud locations, and for the nats.io network, NGS. So if you're building something on top of NATS, then we've made this easy as well. And we're going to continue to make it easy for other services down the road as well.
Interesting. So that kind of address probably the largest impediment, right, to using multiple clouds with the orchestration and the identity management there. So I guess the next piece, right, is obviously cyber, and so we kind of hinted about it a little bit, but for me, it was always essential not to use the CSP cyber only capabilities because I wanted to be able to have a cohesive cyber enforcement stack. I didn't want to have drifts between, police enforcement point and, every layer, whether you're still using some WAF, some IPS, or some, zero trust fancy, capability using software defined parameter and whatnot. I wanted to have a cohesive cyber stack across on-prem, edge, and clouds. So we built it, with Istio and runtime security and moving target defense and killing containers going back to cattle, right? All this good stuff, immutability, GitOps, no human in production, right? If you start drifting that away and you're losing, that to have multiple clouds, you're really increasing your cyber risk. What's your take on the cyber stack? What do you see customers do? Do they often use the customers if they have multiple clouds? Are they using the companies, cloud companies, cyber stacks? Are they building a cohesive stack across all providers? What's the vision, I guess?
We've really seen a mix and match of both of those paradigms, where some companies really like the WAF services and capabilities from
Mm-hmm.
the cloud providers and other like companies like Cloudflare, for example.
Right.
And others like to use open source tools and build that into their actual runtime, their stack. Like there's WAF capabilities so you can run at the edge yourself. Um,
Well,
and
what's your preference? If you had to build a stack for a large organization, what do you recommend? Assuming you have no tech debt and the world is beautiful in Kumbaya and whatnot, what would
yeah,
you do as a greenfield, I guess?
Myself, I'd use the best capabilities from the open source tools in the marketplace to build a stack of my own that I could run anywhere.
Yeah,
Like
you're
I've
more like me. Yeah.
yeah, I contributed to Encore a long time ago to
Mhm.
change some of the detection capabilities and the policy of that tool because it didn't have the capability that we needed at SAP Concur at the time. I think there's so many great tools out there that you can
Yeah.
use, and then it allows you to be very portable to any cloud. But there are certain capabilities that I really enjoy from cloud service providers as well, like yeah, and the way that we built our system is that we provide base level functionality from well-known open source projects as a part of our stack, and we will continue to make that more and more capable over time. For example, with logging, we centralize all the logs for all the workloads because you have to, right? If you're running in all of the different clouds, and suddenly you need to research, okay, where did this request come from? Uh, you need a place to be able to search and get to that specific request, know exactly what edge endpoint it hit and how it
Hmm.
got processed. Well, so we aggregate all of the logs, make them available to search easily with Grafana. But if our customers don't want to use Grafana because maybe they're using Logs.io or CoreLogix or Datadog, well, then they can very easily just change one setting and send all of the logs for all of their workloads to one of those third-party providers. So that's the pattern that we want to follow for all of our capabilities, whether it's container scanning or signing of containers or SBOM tooling to be able to understand, what plugins are being used across their entire ecosystem. We want to provide those capabilities using the open source, well-known, established way of doing this, but also make it very easy to tie into third parties or other tools uh, if customers want to.
Yeah, that's the right amount of flexibility, right? And so you talk about open source tools. Obviously, in cyber, right, you do have a lot of open source capabilities nowadays, and I think the Duty was the biggest adopter of Encore back in the day. I pushed it, to do a lot of different things. Um, but we also see obviously a lot of commercial products, right, bring a ton of value in runtime security and behavior prevention, in runtime, and those can be agnostic to the cloud provider and run anywhere as containers, right? So do you see a lot of cyber companies moving to a Kubernetes delivery model so they can effectively bring their capabilities to you on your Kubernetes cluster?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of different companies in that space. I was at KubeCon in Detroit a few weeks back, and
Yeah.
I was surprised at how many different cybersecurity verticals there are in the space right now. There's just tons of them, and it's so hard to understand what everybody's doing, and a lot of them are quite innovative. So I'm excited to see what is becoming available on top of Kubernetes in this space. I think that you know there's probably going to be some consolidation there, but I'm
Yeah.
excited about where the market is going and how much opportunity there is right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's bloated companies that are trying to do a lot of different things. There's niche companies that are obviously probably gonna be bought maybe by the bloated companies, who knows? But it's interesting how the market is shifting, and it's also interesting how I guess the newer generation behind Kubernetes often forgot about the basics of cyber. We learned the hard way, with the traditional move from the on-premise to cloud to VMs, and they kind of many times forgot about all the basics of cyber, and then they're like, oh, we're moving to Kubernetes, it's magical. But then they realize, wait, we need the same cyber capabilities there too. And so then they're like, oh, I invented this thing on Kubernetes. I'm like, yeah, that's been there for 20 years, on virtual machines. It's just a common cyber thing, but we need it, right? But it's just interesting how it seems like there was a loss of historical basic common knowledge of cyber between the legacy, I guess now, generation of cyber and the modern Kubernetes cloud native generation. It's a little sad because it's like they have to learn the hard way the same things that we knew, for 20 years, And it's just interesting how that happened, and the wall between kind of the legacy and the new teams, right? There's some people obviously that like you that live both, and they and me, right? And then we've seen both sides, but it's true that obviously companies are hiring a lot of the newer generation, and they kind of they just never learned, I guess, all these hard lessons learned. So anyway, it's interesting.
Sure, they haven't lived through it yet, and not
Right,
everybody picks up a book, right?
right. Yeah, I guess it's what's your take on how well we're doing when it comes to learning and education in general, both in Europe and in the US. I just feel like that's why I created Learn with Nick, obviously, for full disclosure. I feel like the curriculums are, very often quite old. Most universities refuse to update. They wanted to use my content, and I said, well, if you do that, you have to update the content every 3 years, which I really wanted 1 year, but they said three. We can't even do three, so five. And I'm like, I'm not gonna put my name next to a course that's 5 years, stuck in time. So what's your take on universities and people coming out of? Do they really need another year to actually learn the real stuff in real life, or
It's
what's the
hard.
plan?
There's too much to learn, right? I
Right.
mean, it's way too much to keep up with.
And
If
then
if
the
you're not
teachers also
updating,
like are stuck in time too in universities, I find, right? They're like, they've never actually done it. They talk about it a lot, right? They actually never actually build the stuff. It's like vacuum stuff. It's just interesting.
that was why I dropped out of college. Actually, is
You're
I
like
was
me.
learning
I didn't
stuff
even go to college too, so yeah.
that was so old. I was learning Pascal,
Hmm.
and I was like, well, I looked at the jobs that are out there. Nobody's looking for Pascal.
Right.
Why am I learning this? So yeah, it needs to be refreshed quite often
What
in
would you say
order.
is the right cycle? We committed on Learn with Nick to do it every 6 months, which is pretty rare. It's pretty never been done before. What's your take on what's the right amount of time to refresh curriculums?
That's hard. It probably depends on the area,
Right.
honestly. There's some
What about the
things.
DevSecOps Cloud Native, Kubernetes landscape?
Yeah, well, that's changing quite rapidly. I think so. Yeah, I think 6 months is probably smart. Maybe a year at most.
At most, yeah.
Yeah, but then
Yeah,
there's some
there's some stuff
areas
we
like
find, hey, that didn't change too much, and some stuff like wow, we have to redo the whole video, and some stuff
yeah,
we
yeah,
don't
I
really have
bet.
to do much. It's interesting.
Yeah, no doubt. Uh,
Cool. So I guess I'm not crazy. So that's good.
no,
Uh, yeah. So, we talked a lot about obviously services, load balancing, routing, transport, orchestration, identities. But one thing we still haven't talked about is the data. You talk about using different services, databases, data services, lakes, warehouse, whatever. But what about data in general? How do people do it? Do you find people? One of the things we've done in DoD when I pushed it, we had a lot of capabilities like MongoDB and Elastic and Kafka and others, right? On Kubernetes as containers, effectively running on different nodes, and the nodes will be in different CSPs and regions and things, which really enabled us to have that diversity. What's your take on the data stuff, and what are you working on there that's going to be different?
yeah, data is always the hard part, right? It has gravity, and that gravity keeps workloads that are using that data close to it.
Hmm.
So it becomes really hard to decouple from data. And we saw this quite a bit from engineering teams at Concur when they were trying to break apart from the monolith and build a microservice, that it was really hard to move the data. So again, a part of the vision of what we built, we wanted to solve for that easily, to be able to have a workload running that may be in the cloud or in another private data center than where the actual data was running. So what we came up with is what we call cloud wormholes, which is a VPN mesh technology where you can run an agent next to where your data is, and that agent makes an outbound VPN tunnel to control plane. And then in that same identity object where you're configuring your cloud resources, you can also configure what private cloud resources can I have access to, or what data resources can I have access to inside a private data center. And then that workload can communicate back through that VPN mesh from anywhere, again, from any cloud, any private cloud, just as if it was running inside the data center. So it uses the same fully qualified domain name and port, just like it was right next to it in order to access that data. Obviously, if you're using something that's sensitive to latency, then you have to keep that in mind when you're leveraging this tool, because if you're communicating to a database in your private data center and your workload's on the other side of the world, well, then you're not going to have a great experience. You're going to have to introduce a caching layer somewhere, and we make that easy as well. If you want to use Redis or you want to use Memcache in order to cache on the edge, so to speak, anywhere in the world and still access the data in your private location, then we have some really good patterns for that.
One of the thing I was building with the joint all domain command and control in the department, which is kind of this IoT connecting all the weapons together across Army, Navy, Air Force, Space Force, and Marine Corps. We're trying to effectively bring a cohesive mesh of weapons, I guess. But obviously that's massive risk, obviously for cyber. But we had the data centricity aspect where we wanted to be able to control who has access to what down to the cell level, right? So we did integrations, with Kafka and with Elastic and others, right? Where the in a same table, for example, the who could be top secret, but the what could be secret, right? And so we will be very granular in labeling cells in a table, for example.
Yeah, so row and column level security.
Right.
Yeah.
Have you thought of kind of that granular level of access control?
I think it's great to use that granular level of access control. It's not really in the space that we're in, right?
Right.
If you were using that already, it would work the same way. If you're using
It
control.
wouldn't disrupt it effectively, right?
Yeah, we're mostly, like, as much as possible, we'd like to stay out of the data path
Right.
and just control access to make it
Right. The
easy to
broader
tie
access.
everything together. For example, when you're using cloud services, we provide the credentials at runtime, but we stay out of the request path completely.
Right.
In the case of our private cloud access through these wormholes, obviously we have to, but we're at the just at
Broader
the
level.
layer 2 level.
Right.
We're not anywhere further up the stack. So.
Right. Right. That makes sense. So I guess when it comes to data, right? You mentioned the the complexity of having the latency, right, between regions and locations. Have you seen customers? One of the need I had was to have a hot replica, right, on different location in CENTCOM and PACOM, and to be able to have a hot replica of the cloud stacks, right? I've seen, I don't know if you've seen that, but I've seen many organizations having no backup or no disaster recovery if the whole cloud disappears or two cloud disappears. Even their backups on the same cloud or even another cloud, which could also disappear for us in terms of a war time, right? What do you think about when it comes to hard replica with data. Can you effectively enable that through the control plane by having a on-premise kind of a data replica?
Yeah, absolutely. We've gotten this request a lot, and we're working on building a piece that will make it even easier. So in the GVC, where you're choosing the geolocations that you're running in, what we're going to add is this notion of a failover location instead of everything being routable
Right.
for all of those locations. And then just we're already checking every endpoint from every edge location to determine how much latency it has and whether it's available in order to do our geo routing, right? So it's a minor change to that logic to then say route all requests to the primary locations. And then if a primary location is unavailable, then bring in one of the backup locations to
Yeah,
that
that's very
geo
cool.
routing capability.
So
So yeah,
your own control plane obviously is using the same things you're preaching, I would assume. Otherwise, you're stupid, but you're not stupid, so I would say yes.
yeah,
I'm gonna answer my own question, but I guess you know when you have that, right? Are you able to instantiate a replica of that control plane for a dedicated customer, so it's not multi-tenant?
yeah. This is another one of those capabilities that we knew we'd have to do. Having done public sector work for SAP, I knew that we were going to
That
have to
was
have
coming.
a
Yeah.
completely isolated control plane at some point in the future when we get our public sector customers. So,
Another thing,
yep,
I think I told the team that the need is now. I wouldn't wait because I think the demand will be tremendous. I know it's a painful customer, but it's also a customer that you look at Onco. You mentioned Onco, so I'm going to mention it. Right? They got the CIBR. I don't know if you know what a CIBR is, but it's a grant, right? It's pretty much free money by the government. I think they got probably 2 or 3 million bucks, and that was kind of how they really grew to become what they are now. That a lot of companies that we funded ended up massively succeeding on the commercial side, but it was often thanks to the kind of the forward leaning DevSecOps team in platform one in DoD. So I would say I know people are always scared of the public sector, but probably timing is great
yeah,
right
yeah,
now. So
we're ready. We'd love to tackle it. We
we
know
have a
what it
lot of
will
people on
take.
the show that obviously are in the public sector and probably
Yeah,
would have a lot of interest talking to you guys. So,
yeah. Happy to chat. We have a very experienced team that's done this before in the public
so how
sector.
much of a lift would it be now to do a dedicated control plane for DoD?
It wouldn't be hard at all. I think that
Okay,
there's a few changes to um, the SSL settings,
right.
and those are changes that we've asked. We have customers asking us to make anyways, and then so I remember one of the challenges with doing this with SAP Concur was inside that zone of trust. I forget what the zone is called, but
Yeah, they all have names. Yeah,
yeah. Everything needs to be run from inside that zone, right?
right.
So you can't even
Almost
have,
like an air gapped environment. Yeah,
yeah, you can't even have container registries that are outside of it. And I remember we were trying to build our DevSecOps pipeline in a way that we could still build and publish software into that zone.
but
Uh,
there are ways to push up, right? So there are ways to push into the registry. So the way we do it, right, is we have a registry on the low side and the high side, and then we push up. It's a one-way push, so we can
yeah.
push containers to the high side. So it's air gap, but it's not really air gap because it's connectivity, right? So
Yeah, I remember the painful bit though was that decision to push it needed to be a manual, like push button
it
for some reason.
depends. It depends on the teams. Platform one, we built a stack that effectively does require just a kind of depending on the scan results, could be completely automated. If it's an already approved container, if it's a new container that has new CVs and there's a manual review, But if it's just an update of an existing container that doesn't bring new CVs, it's completely automated. So
Well, that's good.
yeah,
That sounds like a very good design. It's a lot better than what we had to deal with, 4 years ago when we were doing this one on Concur. So,
you're welcome.
thank you. Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. We built it. It was a lot of work, so no doubt. So let's look a little bit about before we take some questions from the public. And by the way, the public, if you first, if you like these kind of episodes, share with one or two friends. Right? We've been stagnant. We've been good numbers, but we've been stagnant with the audience. So love to get some new faces around here. So feel free to share with one or two people that you know. See if they heard of the show and they want to join us for the next episode. Next Tuesday, actually, we're gonna get another great guest who is gonna come. Matthew is gonna come. He's a CEO of Element, and he's gonna talk to us about decentralized communication and how this works. Very important, obviously, for DoD. Not only to be resilient, but not giving your data away to Mark Zuckerberg on WhatsApp or Signal or whatever. So that's going to be fun. And then, of course, if you have questions for Dan, time is now to post. I have a bunch of them on different social media. But if you want to post in the comment section, we're gonna take some of the questions we already covered, and I tried along the way to follow what people are asking. So we will cover and more questions, but we've answered quite a few already. So my next question was, of course, a lot of companies and not only startups, but also large organizations. You've seen, Facebook announcing a big cut. Twitter, of course, but it's kind of a different reason behind it. But a lot of companies, I think, will think about their talent management and what to do uh, to address what I think is a recession. What's your thought on the economy and also on the talent or lack of talent situation?
Sure. Yeah. Obviously, we have seen a downturn. Over the last 6 months, we've seen a lot of different layoffs, not just Meta and Facebook, but or Twitter, but quite a few companies. In fact, there's a lot of lists out there of folks that have been laid off from even smaller companies, and you can search through
Okay.
those lists to try to find talent, which can be helpful, especially if you have a very unique role you're trying to hire for. But my thoughts in general are that it's still really hard to hire, especially if you're trying to find something very unique, like
Mm-hmm.
someone that knows Kubernetes and knows Istio and knows Knative. There might only be like one or two people out there at any given time that would even entertain an offer to move from one company to another if they have that high skill. So as a hiring manager, you really need to think about the requirements that you're listing for your position and reduce them a little bit. Also, from the perspective of the employee you're trying to bring on, if they're already doing everything that you need for your role, then what's their incentive to switch to another company, right? You want to list some of the requirements as optional so that they can see what it is they're going to learn when they
Right.
join your company and have an incentive to actually make that switch. Like, oh wow, I get to
17
learn.
years experience in Kubernetes. That's what I want.
Yeah, I get to learn Kubernetes, or I get to learn Knative or Istio, right? Whatever it is, if those are your bread and butter, those are pieces of technology that you're using internally, you probably have someone that knows them already, uh, and can help teach someone else how to use and be successful on top of those platforms. Obviously, there's some risk in doing that as well, because then that employee you just hired, their value just suddenly went way up in the marketplace. But um, retention's a whole other story, right? How do you
Right.
keep uh, strong talent in your
So
um,
how
in,
do you do that? I guess answer that
ah,
for us. How do you think is the best way? Obviously, having them learn, right? I used to give an hour a day to my people to learn. I think both to keep up and then to catch up and then keep up. But What's your take on retention?
Yeah, make sure that you're not annoying them by, having them carry a pager and get notified all hours of the day on the weekend, calling them up. Hey,
Yeah.
we have an issue. I need you to work right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just having a really good work environment, a healthy work environment, right? That
It's balance too, right? I feel like, honestly, particularly the newer generations is in this kumbaya universe of like, you know, full job growth and full control by the employees of the landscape. And I think that's going to actually change with a recession. But you know,
sure.
I was shocked. At KubeCon 3 years ago, I had, at least, probably the largest audience because we announced, we put Kubernetes on F-16 jets and stuff. So a lot of people came to see us talk. And I had at least, 200 people waiting at the end to shake my hand or whatever. And at least a good dozen was like, well, when I'm waiting here, but I don't want to shake your hand. It's covered in blood and you're killing babies with jets or whatever. Yeah, and this, the same people are, obviously benefiting from the freedom that they enjoy thanks to the sacrifices of the warfighter. But that's a different problem. But they decided to say, well, no, after talking to you, I have to go spend an hour in the puppy room, And I'm like, the what? And it's just a puppy room. We have a puppy room at KubeCon, right, to go and pet puppies so you can feel better because conference is also stressful. What is the line, right? When is it where we give just too much nonsense? And now, by the way, they're doing a cat room because you don't want to have discrimination, right? So you need some cats too. But
Just
what's the line? Where do you put the line? And look, I want to make people happy, but there's a line where it's out of control.
Yeah, there's some give and take for sure. And I think that, sometimes the pendulum swings too far one way and sometimes
Right?
too far the other as well. So we have to
Where's the
try to
middle?
find,
We
yeah, I
forgot
gotta
the middle,
try to
right?
find a good balance somewhere in the middle, right?
Right.
Where it's not too
Are you all
crazy.
remote in the company, or you have an office? So
We are, yeah, we were fully remote from day one. This was fall of 2019. So we had no idea what was coming, obviously, but that was just the model that we thought would work well to be able to hire
no need of
easily.
ping pong table and all that good stuff.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
no ping pong table. So how do you make sure the team is that is tough in a virtual environment, right? To build rapport and good good engagements between the team members, particularly on something pretty complex. How do you find the best way for you guys has been to do that?
Um, it is hard. There's no, I don't think there's an easy answer either because it you don't want to be a pest and constantly be on a Zoom call with folks. So you have to give them time to have
Yes.
some of the freedom, but also you want to have that deep um, relationship between folks because if they know and trust each other, then they're going to work better together and be able to accomplish more. We try to get the team together once a year. It's optional, but I think
Even
it's
once a year is
very
optional. That's
very
that's
very
not very
high
demanding.
value.
Yeah.
So everybody has wanted to get
Right.
together,
Only
and
once a year. You think that's enough?
I don't know if it's enough. I mean,
Right.
we'll just have to see how things
How
work
many
out.
are you now? I guess.
It's a small but mighty team. We're able to get a lot done without having too many folks right now. We are growing, and we plan on growing more rapidly here in the near term. But yeah, it's not a big team. So getting everybody together, it's not this like big conference like KubeCon, that's for sure. So
Right, right. Did you actually use KubeCon as a way to bring people together, or do you use
we did.
events to
Yeah,
do
that
that? Yeah,
that was one of our biggest meetings so far today. Was
right,
so far this year was getting everybody together at KubeCon. It was great to see everybody in person that was there, and
right.
also to just talk to customers and face
Is it
to face.
like the best conference for cloud native companies? KubeCon is that kind of the
I think so.
grail?
It probably depends on the type of company you're trying to market to a little bit because there's a ton of different tech conferences out there, and yeah, at this CNCF in Detroit, there was a lot of public sector actually. So
Yeah.
It was really good for getting that perspective of the marketplace. But yeah,
Yeah, we
each one's a little
created a
bit.
momentum that's getting bigger and bigger. So
Yeah.
that's good. All right, so I already took a few questions while talking to you. So let's see. What about the logging visibility supply to the current cloud providers? How do you know, is your process tampering with what the cloud providers can then do?
No, it's not tampering with it. We provide that centralized logging because it is such a key capability to be
Right.
able to see what's going on from anywhere. But we still allow you to forward those logs to any other source. So if you wanted to even send it to just S3, then you could configure those logs up to S3. We also do this for audit. So we have our
Mm-hmm.
own uh, non-tamperable audit trail for any changes to our API that's all centralized. You can see in one place, someone makes a change to an identity, someone makes a change to a workload, who made that change, what IP did they come from, what was their JOT token claims, what exactly changed, what was the value before and after uh,
Mm-hmm.
on our platform. It's very, very easy to see, which isn't often the case from the API trail that you get from a cloud provider. We wanted to make this as easy to understand as possible.
Mm,
Um,
very interesting. I guess one of the question was about the costs. Do you get do you give, I guess, visibility, a cohesive visibility on the cloud spendings across cloud providers so they can see how much money is being spent on multiple providers?
so for the compute layer, yes, since we're fully managing that layer, we have very good visibility into that. You can set alerts to get notified if you're outside of a spend limit that you set for yourself. A very nice dashboard where it's easy to understand what you're spending your money on. But as far as the third-party services that your workloads are leveraging from the cloud directly, we're not in that space today where there's some great companies out there that can consolidate your spend and in different cloud providers and give you a nice dashboard on top of that.
Right,
That
right. That's your
it's not a
business. Yeah.
space we're in. So yeah.
Yeah. Um, let's see. Um, so with your logging capability, right? You talked about Kibana in terms of like the dashboard, but where are you centralizing the logs? What platform do you use? Are you using, Elastic or whatever, S3 buckets? Well, how do you store all these logs, I guess,
Yeah.
across clouds?
Sure. Well, we store them in our own managed solution that is able to span cloud providers.
Mm,
So yeah, everything that we build, we have to think about how do we design this thing so that it is available anywhere and decoupled. So we provide the easy cloud agnostic solution to each of our customers, but we have to do the hard multi-cloud stuff ourselves internally. As an example, on the audit side, when an audit log gets written from any of our edge locations anywhere in the world, it gets written to two different queuing platforms from two different cloud providers. And then we ingest from that queue and store it in our non-tamperable audit storage so that even if there's a failure for a queuing system in one of the providers, we're still going to be able to capture that audit event. So that's the type of architecture that we have to design for internally with our services. I
right.
know that doesn't give you the specific example that you're looking for with the logging, but that's the type of architecture that we have to have out there for it.
So do you usually build them on top of open source capabilities, or you just built it from scratch, I guess?
We do, yeah. We
Yeah.
use open source tools as much as possible, and we love to give back to those open source products with fixes that we've had to make in order to run things at scale across multiple cloud providers.
Uh-huh.
There's some Istio stuff that we have coming that we've had to tweak quite a bit in order to make it more efficient when running a high number of workloads and running Knative, um, that we intend to give back to the community as well. Um, Prometheus stuff, being able to scrape and collect logs or metrics with Prometheus at scale, in particular when you're using Istio and Knative, is extremely problematic because of the sheer number of series that need to be maintained inside Prometheus. So we end up with a ton of memory bloat. So we've had to do customizations there as well, in order to make it efficient, that we're giving back to the community. So
Very cool. Last question before, so every time at the end of the show, I'm going to give you the last words for the group. I'll just remind everybody before of the next episode, but I have one more question before we do that, which came from the public too. We talk a little bit about economy, I guess, but are you guys hiring, and are you going to raise around, or what's the situation, I guess, with the company?
we are hiring. We have a raise in progress right now, that I think is like days away from getting signed. And yeah, we're
Make
definitely on
sure
the
you
right
use
track.
U.S. funds,
Yeah,
so you can do a lot in the federal government. Don't make the
yeah,
mistake to go to China, okay?
yeah. No
Or
doubt.
a fund that has ties to China. That's my recommendation. Uh, but yeah, this is exciting stuff. So you want to make sure this is going to be accessible to DoD. I think that could be your biggest customer. So
Absolutely.
and what about? So you did a raise. Is it the Series A, or what is this?
It is a Series A. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're hiring. Where can people find that? Is it on your website?
Um, that's a really good question. We use social media a lot in
LinkedIn and
the
stuff.
positions that we have open. So, we tend to have like more of a targeted approach right now. But we
Right.
probably need to have a board out there so that everybody can see which positions are
Yes,
available.
I
So
think it's time.
yeah, yeah,
LinkedIn can be good for that too, right? So.
yeah.
All right, so I wanted to remind everybody next Tuesday we're gonna have Matthew coming from he's the CEO of Element, who is behind the open source project Matrix. That's the centralized collaboration stack that's really designed to be completely decentralized, and we'll talk about what that means, the benefits, the resiliency, all that good stuff for decentralized communications, which is so important for obviously for teams like DoD, no doubt. So we're gonna have fun next Tuesday, 1 p.m. Eastern. I wanted to thank you, Dan, for the time. It was great. I think we learned a lot about how to be cloud agnostic, that it is doable to do that, and people can check out Control Plane, your company, on your website and LinkedIn, of course, and you're on LinkedIn as well, so they can find you there. And with that, I give you the last words.
Thank you for your time, Nick. It was an honor to be here, to have the chance to chat, and looking forward to doing more in the public sector space with Control Plane.
Thanks so much, everybody. Everybody stay safe, and please keep fighting the good fight so our kids have a fighting chance at winning against China 20 years from now. Stay safe. See you soon next Tuesday.